This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Where was she when you first saw her?
She was in the bedroom.
Tell the members of the jury how you ended up in that bedroom, if you remember.
I walked into that bedroom. She was bound with her wrists behind her back. She was bound by her ankles.
What about her eyes?
Her eyes were taped shut. She was bound with tape around her mouth. With a belt around her neck.
What state of dress or undress was she in?
She was naked. I saw Janet being raped vaginally by Mr. Paiva, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Lynch.
What did you do in that bedroom, Miss Swank?
I was part of the cheering session.
Hi everyone, I'm Talia.
And I'm Tanya.
And together we are TNT Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi Tanya.
Hey, Talia.
How are you doing today?
I am doing fabulous.
Welcome back, everybody, to our newest episode of Crimes and Consequences. I hope everybody is doing great, but I do want to ask all of you listening right now, if you haven't already done so, go ahead and just hit that little subscribe button.
So what do you got for me today, Talia?
The story that I'm going to talk about today is really dark.
Oh.
Really, really dark. It's just so disturbing that I almost didn't do it.
That bad?
It's that bad.
So you would classify it as a 10 on our gruesome scale?
It's not really necessarily gruesome as much as really, really dark and disturbing. And you'll see, because I'm going to tell you the story. And it's one you've never heard before. I'm sure of it. On January 31st in 1979, the police in Holland, Michigan, received an alarming phone call from a 39-year-old man named Robert Lynch. He'd been on the phone with a clerk at a place called the Blue Mill Inn, which was a local motel, when he overheard an intruder barge into the office of the motel, and he heard the clerk say, "Don't take it all, sir." When the police got to the motel, a witness told them that Janet Chandler, the hotel front desk clerk, had been kidnapped by someone driving what looked like a Jeep, but the witness didn't really get a good look at the vehicle. There were two fresh sets of footprints in the snow leading from the front door to the parking lot. Janet's jacket was still on a chair in the motel's office, and one of the Salem cigarettes she was smoking was still smoldering in the ashtray. In addition, the motel safe was open and $500 cash was missing from it. On the desk of the front desk, there were some notes jotted down on a piece of paper by Janet, and Janet was very religious. So these notes said, quote, "When was Paul saved? When the Lord spoke to him to go, or when he obeyed God and went?" I guess that's what she was thinking about right before she was kidnapped. Even though the motel was at full capacity that night, no one really saw much of anything. At approximately 1:30 a.m. on February 1st, a snowplow in South Haven, Michigan, was using the median on a highway, Highway 196, as a turnaround. And as he was turning around, he noticed tire tracks that appeared to be recently made on the side of the road that went into the woods. So for some reason, he decided to follow them. His headlights spotlighted what appeared to be an arm and a torso sticking out of the snow. It was the naked body of 22-year-old Janet Chandler. She had clearly been physically and sexually brutalized and then buried in the snow. For months, investigators interviewed her friends, her coworkers, her family, and they compiled over 1,000 pages of notes. But her case went cold for 22 years. Then, in 2004, 8 students and a professor at Hope College, which is a Christian college in Holland, Michigan, made a documentary for their film class called Who Killed Janet Chandler? That renewed interest in the case. And eventually investigators were able to solve this horrific crime. And when I say horrific, I mean horrific. I want to warn everyone again that it's really disturbing what happened to Janet. On the day her body was discovered, an autopsy was performed by the medical examiner. The results indicated that a device, most likely a belt, had been used to strangle her. There were scratch marks on her neck, consistent with her attempting to get the belt off of her neck. In addition, there was adhesive residue in a rectangular shape over her mouth and her eyes, which was consistent with duct tape. Her wrist showed bruising from handcuffs. She'd been beaten, and her body showed it had been violently raped vaginally and anally. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Janet Chandler. She was born May 29th, 1956, to Jim and Glenna Chandler. She was raised in a conservative Christian family with 2 brothers. They were so conservative that Janet wasn't even allowed to have sleepovers at friends' house if their parents drank alcohol. In middle school, Janet sang in her church choir, and she even went on evangelical missions. Around the time of her murder, she was a senior at Hope College. As I said, it's a Christian school, and she majored in music, hoping to get a bachelor's degree so she could eventually teach music at a Christian school. She was described as easygoing, but lived a sheltered life. Janet's family knew her as a good girl with strong Christian values. However, there was a side to Janet they didn't know. Around the age of 17, she met a much older man, and for over a year, she would sneak him into her house for sex when her parents were away. As a result of the affair, Janet realized that committing a sin wasn't an automatic sentence to hell, so she started relaxing some of her religious views. One of Janet's college teachers actually described her as emotionally volatile, and she recalled many times when Janet would run out of a classroom as a young adult, crying if she was criticized. While attending Hope College, Janet worked part-time as a clerk at the local motel I told you called Blue Mill in Holland. In August of 1978, about 6 months before her death, she moved into a duplex with a manager of the Blue Mill Inn. She was 21-year-old Lori Swank, whom Janet considered to be her best friend. Near the Blue Mill Inn was the Chemetron Corporation. That's a local plant that manufactured paint. And in the fall of 1978, there was this massive strike at the plant. Over 200 union members walked out. The Teamsters Union brought in experienced strikers to join the picket line, and things were getting really heated. So, in response to the growing tension, Chemetron Corporation contracted out additional security guards from a company called Wackenhut. And so there ended up being 80 new security guards at the plant from all over the United States. The picketers would hackle the guards, and the guards would harass them. They even placed spikes under their tires, and it was a very tense, volatile time. Since Chemetron was right next to the Blue Mill Inn, It had 80 rooms reserved for the new security guards to stay and live in during the strike. Next door to the Blue Mill Inn was a bar called the Tap Room, and that's where all the guards would go to after their shift to get hammered. The group of guards that stayed at the inn were described as a wild bunch who liked to party. And Janet and her roommate Lori liked to party with them. In fact, the Blue Mill Inn became somewhat of a party central with non-stop partying going on, and people would literally go from room to room. There was one guard in particular that caught Janet's eye. His name was Carl Paiva, and he was a local guard in charge of coordinating security. He actually didn't stay at the Blue Mill Inn. He lived in a guest house on the plant grounds. Janet started, quote unquote, dating him, but whatever they were doing didn't last very long because he treated her really bad. Both Lori and Janet had sex with a lot of the security guards that stayed at the inn. I mean, a lot. On one occasion, Janet actually got reprimanded for having sex with one of the guards in a suite that they used as a display suite. She also had a sexual relationship with a guy named Robert Lynch. Robert is the man who called 911, who was a local security guard, almost 20 years her senior. They would often meet at an abandoned house to have sex.
That's kind of scary.
It's scary and gross, especially when she's at a hotel.
I know.
Robert liked to drink a lot, and he was actually considered an alcoholic. As I told you, this case grew cold. But after that documentary was released, there was this influx of activity that occurred. And the investigators decided to talk to and re-interview all of her friends and family and coworkers from back in 1978 and 79. One of them was Robert Lynch. By this time, and it's around 2004, he was married. He had 2 kids. They were grown and both very successful. He opened his own cosmetology school, but he was a hardcore alcoholic who actually was experiencing dementia from drinking so much. Do you know how much you have to drink?
I'm thinking you had to drink a lot to have alcohol-induced dementia?
Yes. The police interviewed him repeatedly when the case was reopened, and they could sense that he wanted to tell them something. And they were right. In 2005, eventually, he told them that Janet went to a party on the night she died and that some people, quote, went haywire at the party. He then said, quote, I regret my whole life. Some of the things I've done, I don't even want to talk about. But he did talk about the things he did. Investigators were able to piece together the horrific events that occurred on the last night Janet was alive. And I will get to what happened to her right after our infomercial / shameless plug. Hey everyone, if you go to our website, tntcrimes.com, you can find full unreleased episodes available for individual purchase. You can also join our membership where you get unlimited access to all of our unreleased episodes and early releases, mini episodes, and so many other awesome things. So go to tntcrimes.com. And thanks again for all your support. We're back, and this is what Robert Lynch explained to investigators happened on the night of the murder. On January 30th, 1979, he had just finished his shift as a guard, and he was really tired. So he headed back to the Blue Mill Inn to get some rest. He knows that not long after that, Janet was confronted by one of the maids from the Blue Mill Inn. The maid had heard that Janet had called her boyfriend, the maid's boyfriend, to come to one of the motel rooms. And when he arrived, Janet was waiting there for him, completely naked, except for a pair of cowboy boots. The maid was screaming at Janet, and they were very loud. There was this loud confrontation in the hallway. But the maid wasn't the only one upset with Janet. Lori, her roommate and best friend, had a major crush on Carl. And the sexual relationship that Janet had with Carl made Lori really jealous. Lori felt that Janet was more popular with the security guards, and the jealousy was just overwhelming to Lori. Behind Janet's back, Lori was trashing her to Carl. Lori told Carl that Janet had been sleeping with lots of the security guards that worked under his command, and it, for some reason, just really pissed him off. He called Janet a slut and said he was going to take care of her. Together, Carl, along with another guard named Bubba Nelson, planned what they called, quote, a surprise party for Janet. They intended to teach her a brutal lesson about sleeping around through gangbanging at the party. And they invited dozens of people.
Oh my God, seriously?
They said, quote, she needs to be fucked to death. Around 2 a.m. that morning, Robert Lynch was sleeping in his motel room when he got a call. Carl and some of the other guards needed him to help lure Janet out of the motel office. They were trying to come up with a ruse to get her to leave. According to Robert, he went down to the motel lobby and he met Bubba Nelson there. Bubba Nelson told Janet that there was a party at the guest house at the Chematron plant in which Carl was staying in, and they were surprising her by throwing a party in her honor. Somehow, probably because Janet was very naive, Bubba convinced her to allow him to put gauze over her eyes and seal it with duct tape as part of the, we're going to blindfold you and take you to the surprise we have for you. Blindfolded, Janet walked out to the car that was waiting outside with Bubba. Robert says that he stayed behind because he had to go to work at 6 a.m. However, he is the one that came up with the idea of covering up everything by making it look like a robbery and calling the police. While Robert was heading back to bed, Janet was being taken to the guest house. It wasn't until she actually got there that she realized she'd been set up. There was a party, but the point of the party was strictly to torture and humiliate Janet. For the next 17 hours, 25 people came in and out of the house. They were drinking, dancing to music, and they all witnessed the degradation and rape of Janet, and no one stopped it.
And no one said anything.
No one said anything.
For years, it was Robert that broke the case, right?
Yeah, pretty much. There were things that led up to it, but yeah, Robert's the one that ended up spilling the beans. So while Robert's at work, because he started work at 6 a.m., Janet's being humiliated and raped and beaten. When Robert gets off work at 6 p.m., he decides he's going to go over to the guest house to see what he's missed. When he got there, he saw Janet naked, sitting on a couch. Her mouth was duct taped and her hands were tied. Her eyes looked glassy to him, and he thought she was on drugs. But her autopsy found no alcohol and no drugs in her system. And in all likelihood, she was probably in a state of shock along with sleep deprivation. One of the guards was dancing around in his underwear while the other men and women were hanging out and drinking. One of the women was Carl's new girlfriend, Patty. Patty described to the authorities that when she arrived at the party, she saw Janet sitting on the couch next to Bubba Nelson. Bubba was verbally abusing her, calling her a slut and a whore and slapping her. And at one point, he wrapped a belt around Janet's neck and he pulled her towards him. And the people at the party would take turns with a belt, dragging her around like a rag doll.
This is just sick.
Then Bubba moved Janet to a nearby bedroom. According to Patty, when she went into the bedroom a few minutes later, Janet mumbled something like she was all right. Carl then made Patty leave the room. And according to Patty, she protested and asked them to stop doing what they were doing to Janet. She said that her boyfriend Carl and Bubba said that they would do the same thing to her if she interfered. So that's apparently why she didn't do anything to stop this.
And kept the secret for 22 years.
Yep. Later, Bubba and 2 other men then took Janet to another bedroom upstairs. After Janet was taken upstairs, she was still naked, and her arms and legs would be bound for a while and then unbound, and her eyes would be taped shut, and then they would remove the tape. The belt was placed around her neck. There were a lot of horrible, brutal things that were done to her. Once she was taken to the second bedroom, men lined up outside the door, and they were all security guards waiting to take their turn to rape her. Another guard named Freddie, his job was to stand by the door, and he was in charge of who could enter, how many could enter, who could, go in and rape her. However, Carl, he had the ultimate authority to decide who could rape Janet and how they could rape her. While all this was happening, Carl asked another guard named Ronald to take photos of the rape, which he did. So you have to imagine, Janet is in this room. There's a line outside the door to rape her. These are all people she knows. Another person's filming the horrific events. She was forced to perform oral sex on Freddie, Robert, and Bubba, all while being raped by other men. The men, for fun, took turns hitting her in the face with their penises. Then 2 other women showed up. They were maids at the Blue Mill Inn. They were Janet's co-workers.
Are you kidding me?
Their names were Cheryl and Diane. And they didn't do anything to stop it. And keep in mind, all the people's names that I'm mentioning to you knew they were invited to this party, and they all knew the point of the party. Freddie started raping Janet, and when he left the room, he announced to everyone, quote, "That was a good fuck." After a while, Janet seemed to be drifting in and out of consciousness, and occasionally she would struggle to break free. Another man named Anthony Williams was eager for his turn to rape Janet, and in front of everybody, he pulled her hair, anally raped her, and ejaculated on her back. But the worst offender of all was Carl. He was particularly brutal in his treatment towards Janet. And as I said, he directed everybody in what they should be doing to her. During the rapes, he would yell things such as, quote, "Fuck her to death. That fucking bitch, she deserves to die. She deserves to be fucked to death." Some of the people there were described as the cheering section.
Oh my God. Seriously, Talia?
They cheered on the rapists. All of these rapists yelled horrible things to Janet while they were doing that to her. And they all took turns pulling on the belt. Because the loose end of the belt, if you pulled on it, it would tighten. At some point, someone poured hot wax all over Janet's back. And again, they would penetrate Janet. They'd pull on the belt, forcing her head up, and then they would let it go down, and then they'd force her head back up. I think the biggest betrayal in all of this is while Carl is brutalizing Janet, Lori walks into the room and encourages him to continue raping her. She looked at Janet in the face and told her she was a bitch.
This is her best friend.
And her roommate.
Oh my gosh.
Lori described herself as being part of the cheering section. Then Robert Lynch, the guy that called 911, he raped Janet. He got on top of her and he straddled her and he was slapping her. And then he was whispering in her ear things like, "You're a whore." He bit her neck and he punched her repeatedly, all the while pulling on the belt. Then someone yelled out, "She's dead." Robert tried to find a pulse and he checked to see if Janet's heart was beating, but it wasn't. He removed the duct tape and he said her eyes had this vacant stare. Now, Carl freaked out. He threw a chair against the floor and he yelled, quote, "This party is fucking over." And most of the people took off. Some stayed behind to help clean up the house. Lori went back to the Blue Mill Inn. Freddie, Robert, Bubba, and Carl washed off Janet's body in the shower. Then they wrapped it in a tarp. Robert took her body and dumped it in that wooded area where the snowplower found her. The pictures of the rape were given to Carl by Ronald, the photographer. And Carl made sure everybody knew that there were pictures of them participating. So if anybody wanted to go to the authorities, he had evidence he could use against them to get them in trouble. A funeral was held for Janet, and this is just so unbelievable. Carl, Robert, and Lori went to the funeral.
They are some sick-ass people. Did Lori cry,
Yes.
too? You're
I was
kidding
just going to
me.
say she cried.
Oh.
She played the grieving friend to a T. At the funeral, they played a song that Janet recorded of her singing called "My Jesus."
Oh.
During the investigation immediately following the murder, Patty provided an alibi for Carl to the police. Allegedly, Carl told her she'd end up dead on the side of the road if she didn't lie to authorities, so she made up a story about how they were together someplace other than his house. 2 weeks after the murder, the strike ended, and all those security guards that were from all over the United States went back home. 9 days after the murder, Lori moved back to Pennsylvania, where she was originally from. None of those people said anything for decades. In 2005, when a cold case team formed to reinvestigate the murder, and I told you all the guards were interviewed, as you know, Robert Lynch was married, had 2 grown children. Freddie Parker, he was the guy that was at the door allowing people in and out.
The gatekeeper?
Yeah, the gatekeeper. That's a good name for him. Well, there's better names for him, but yeah. Freddie Parker at this time was 50 years old. He suffered from diabetes, and he used a cane to walk around. He told authorities he was not involved in the murder. He had nothing to do with it, and he actually was living in West Virginia at the time the murder occurred. However, Freddie's ex-girlfriend came forward, and she was Diane, a maid at the Blue Mill Inn, who also was one of the women at the quote-unquote party. And Diane said, "Yeah, I saw him raping Janet." She actually continued to have a relationship with him for a while, and he would brag to her about raping Janet. Freddie was extradited to Michigan and charged with first-degree murder. Police tracked down Bubba Nelson. In 2005, he was living off his Social Security benefits and taking care of his 2 autistic sons in West Virginia, too. He was extradited to Michigan and charged with first-degree murder. Police then arrested Anthony Williams, another whack and hunt guard, who, of course, denied any involvement in the crime. Now, Lori Swank, she was found in Pennsylvania. She was working as a nursing assistant at a hospital. And at first, she denied any involvement and continued to say, "I don't know what kind of a person or people could do this to her. I don't know how that person could live with himself. I know I couldn't." And that's a quote.
That is unbelievable.
But eventually she confessed. Carl Paiva, he was still in the area and he refused to cooperate with investigators. And he said he had absolutely nothing to do with it. And he didn't know why all of these people were lying and saying he was participating when he wasn't even there. As I told you, there were about 25 people in attendance at the party, but authorities weren't able to prosecute everyone. So they had to focus on the perpetrators they had the strongest evidence against, which was Carl, Bubba, Anthony, Robert, and Lori. In December of 2007, 28 years after Janet's murder, a trial was held. Carl, Bubba, Robert, and Freddie were all tried together. Now, Lori Swank, she pled guilty to a charge of second-degree murder with a term of 10 to 20 years imprisonment in exchange for her testimony. And I'm going to play a little bit of what she had to say right now.
Where was she when you first saw her?
She was in the bedroom, in a bedroom.
Tell the members of the jury how you ended up in that bedroom, if you remember.
I walked into that bedroom. She was bound with her wrists behind her back. She was bound by her ankles.
What about her eyes?
Her eyes were taped shut. She was bound with tape around her mouth. And there was a belt around her neck.
What state of dress or undress was she
She
in?
was naked. I saw Janet being raped vaginally by Mr. Paiva, Mr. Nelson, Mr. Lynch.
Did you ever hear anything specific that Carl Paiva said during the course of these rapes?
Yes, at one point, Mr. Paiva was looking at Janet and he's like,
Was he raping her at this point?
yes, he's raping her and saying, how do you like that?
What did you do in that bedroom, Miss Swank?
I was part of the cheering session.
What were you doing?
I was looking at Janet. I called her. I encouraged the activity. As they were raping Janet, they'd pull up on the belt and her head would come up and then they would release it and then they would pull up on it and then they would release it.
Who was pulling on that belt?
Mr. Paiva, Mr. Lynch, Mr. Nelson.
What about Mr. Parker?
Yes.
How long, roughly, did you watch this assault go on for?
Approximately an hour. Mr. Lynch was raping Janet, pulling up on the belt and releasing it, and pulling up on the belt and releasing it. And all of a sudden, I heard somebody say, she's dead. I feared for my life. I never spoke to my family about this at all. I was afraid I would be charged. Afraid of the relationship I would have with my family afterward. I was also afraid of the relationship I might or might not have with my daughter.
You've been in fear for how long?
Since this happened,
Pretty much your whole life since you were 21 years old?
yes,
Why did you finally decide to tell the police the truth?
for one reason it's the right thing to do. Another reason is for Janet's family and for Janet. Another reason is for the community. Another reason is for me.
I feel like I'm going to throw up. I can't believe what they did to this poor woman. Lori is a disgusting human being. All of these people are horrible.
It's just strange to think that they went on to live their lives when they did such a horrible horrible thing. It's such a betrayal to be her best friend and do that.
And she was just jealous of her because she was
popular.
Yes.
For his cooperation, Robert Lynch was given a plea deal, and he pled guilty to second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 25 to 40 years in prison. I'm going to play a little bit of what he had to say.
Did you see anybody clean up Janet Chandler's body?
No, sir.
Did you have anything to do with disposing of that body?
Yes, sir.
And tell the jury, if you would, how that happened.
Well, I was supposed to help pick the body up and put it in the car.
And did you do that?
No, because I couldn't lift it.
All right. Did you have some help?
Yes.
And who helped you?
I don't remember who it was, sir. By that time, I was pretty well inebriated.
Did you know at that time a person by the name of Robin Clonky?
Yes, I did.
Was Robin Clonky at this guest house during these events?
Yes.
Was Robin Clonky in that room where Janet Chandler was being raped?
I believe he was.
Did Robin Clonky assist in removing Janet Chandler's body from the house and putting it in the car?
I don't remember, sir.
Did you drive a vehicle away from that house with Janet Chandler's body?
Yes, sir.
And who was in the car with you?
Everybody that was in the room.
Everyone was in the car?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Was Robin Clonky in the car with you when you drove
Yes,
away?
sir.
Who else can you remember that was in the car?
Arthur Paiva.
At his sentencing, he addressed the court and said, quote, "I hope the family rests in peace, and I ask forgiveness from Janet. I worked hard for 18 months to see this come to an end, and I hope it does now."
Well, give me a break.
He worked so hard. Oh, we're so thankful, Robert. Thank you
Right?
so much. After a jury trial, it didn't take long for the jury to reach its verdict.
Members of the jury, I have been advised by the bailiff that you have agreed upon a verdict. If so, let your foreperson rise. Mr. Foreman, have you agreed upon a unanimous verdict?
Yes, we have.
As to the matter of the people of the state of Michigan versus Anthony Williams, count 1, premeditated first-degree murder, what is your verdict?
Guilty of the lesser offense of second-degree murder.
As to count 2, felony murder kidnapping.
Guilty of felony murder kidnapping.
And as to count 3, felony murder criminal sexual conduct.
Guilty of felony murder sexual conduct.
Turning then to the matter of the people of the state of Michigan versus Freddie Parker. As to count 1, premeditated first-degree murder, what is your verdict?
Guilty of the lesser offense of second-degree murder.
As to count 2, what is your verdict?
Guilty of felony murder kidnapping.
And as to count 3, what is your verdict?
Guilty of felony murder criminal sexual conduct.
Turning to the matter of people of the state of Michigan versus Arthur Paiva, as to count 1, what is your verdict?
Guilty of premeditated first-degree murder.
As to count 2, what is your verdict?
Guilty of felony murder kidnapping.
And as to count 3, what is your verdict?
Guilty of felony murder criminal sexual conduct.
Turning to the matter of the people of the state of Michigan versus James Nelson, as to count 1, what is your verdict?
Guilty of the lesser offense of second-degree murder.
As to count 2, what is your verdict?
Guilty of felony murder kidnapping.
And as to count 3, what is your verdict?
Guilty of felony murder criminal sexual conduct.
Thank you. You may be seated. Members of the jury, is that the verdict of each of you?
Yes.
The jury having returned a verdict of guilty as to all defendants, the defendants are remanded to the Ottawa County Jail. Sentencing will be set for December 10 at 1 o'clock in the Grand Haven, Ottawa County Circuit Court. Thank you very much, and we're in recess.
At the sentencing hearing, Janet's father spoke out, and he said, quote, "Glenn and I have been waiting 28 years for this day. They thought they got away with it, and for the most part, they did. But because of the hard work and dedication of the cold case team and others, they've finally been brought to justice. And interestingly, the prosecutor in this case is Donna Pendergast, who, this is like the fourth case I've done with Donna's, from the Attorney General's office.
She's a rock star in Michigan.
I told you when I worked there, everybody loved Donna. Everybody loved Donna. The two Blue Mill Inn maids, Sherry and Diane, they were asked in an interview with Dateline if they felt any responsibility for Janet's death. And Sherry said, quote, "No, not at all." But Diane said she felt shame, but she warned others not to be so quick to judge as they haven't walked in her shoes.
Oh, seriously? This is so stupid. They should feel extreme amounts of guilt.
That is exactly what the investigators said. At any point, they could have called the police, but to do nothing.
For decades.
Decades. So appeals were filed. And we have the audio of the entire appellate hearing, which is about 40 minutes long. And it's actually really interesting. We have that for our members only. But I'm going to play just a snippet of what the judge had to say at the appeals hearing.
I've been a judge now for 15 years, and this is the most horrific crime that I've seen. The corroborating witnesses, and there were many of them, described an event which was the most depraved and coordinated gang rape killing of a young lady. It's horrific. And I just bring that up because to remind you of our standard of review. The errors that you complain the trial court made, the prosecutor made, have to have made a difference to the outcome.
And they were denied. Carl Paiva died in prison on March 13th in 2013 from respiratory failure. Bubba is still in prison. Robert Lynch is still in prison and looking like shit. You all have to go to our website and see his prison photo. He looks rough. He looks like he's about 150 years old. Freddie Parker, he's still in prison. Lori Swank was paroled.
Was she really?
And according to an article I read by Ellen Killeran, Lori is working at a faith-based nonprofit company that provides food, housing, and legal services to those in need.
This is her way of getting God to forgive her. I don't believe for 1 second she's sorry. I really don't. I don't know.
I don't either.
I don't believe her.
I think it's one of those she's only sorry because she got caught.
Exactly.
And maybe throughout her life she had little snippets of failing bad, but not too bad, apparently.
Not too bad. Not enough to go to the police about it.
I mean, then again, there is redemption, Tanya.
There is. I'm sorry. I'm a very cynical person.
Anyway, that is the really awful story of what happened to Janet Chandler. And I want to give credit where credit is due. I got most of the information actually from the court cases. There's quite a few, as you can imagine. And also from an article in glamour.com and another one from heraldpalladium.com. Thank you for listening to that traumatizing story. And if anybody wants, you can buy the documentary that the film students made. It's called Who Killed Janet Chandler. I know it's online and I know it's available. And kudos to them for helping bring renewed interest in it. So I want to thank everybody for listening to us and listening to this episode. If you are interested in listening to some of our online-only episodes, you can purchase them for 99 cents on our website, TNT Crimes, or you can become a member and help support us because we really appreciate your support. You can go to patreon.com/TNT Crimes and become 3rd degree, 2nd degree, 1st degree, whatever you feel like doing to help support us. We really appreciate you.
And you can find us on social media too, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, where we post a lot of extras for you to enjoy throughout the week.
Absolutely. Speaking of throughout the week, I hope throughout your week it is awesome and you are safe and happy and healthy.
Until next week.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.